Alright, welcome back to another one of my level editor tutorials, kind of making these back to back. Today I'm going to be going over force zones and grav triggers. Now, force zones and grav triggers are really useful for changing the way the car physics behaves. Now, as you can see here, they're not real objects, as in if I turn off center points, you can't even tell they're there. They're logical objects, meaning that once this car right here goes inside the box, the effect is applied. And you'll see what I mean here real quick. So first let's just talk about force zones. What are they? How do they work? Well, a force zone, you can think of it like if you were inside a spaceship, it's a cube inside which some kind of force is applied, like centrifugal force or gravity force. You can see you can change the force type, turn it into a global force, which just changes the axis upon which it operates. So wind right here. This is really good for boosters. So let's say we change this to 10,000 right here, because we're just going to be going through it really quick, and then really shoots you out. This is the direction, this purple line right here. So say, for example, we changed it from that to this. And I'd like to note, you can indeed just rotate it. It just operates on whatever direction it's going. So you got it pointing up, bingo, that's exactly what happens. That's pretty much all there is to it. The drag multiplier, that I'm actually not really sure. I think, let's try it out. Let's make this real big. Change the wind speed down, and then turn up the drag. Aha! Well, it looks like force zones can double as grav trigger zones. Okay, so, drag. Drag is just how much drag the car has here. Now, you can really easily see the difference in the two amounts of drag here. Whereas in one, it was really tough to go. It was like you were driving through molasses or through a really heavy wind. The other was just like you were driving on ice or you were driving in space. So this is really just air resistance, I suppose. So for example, if you wanted to have a bit of wind that was blowing in the direction of, let's say, the opposite direction the car is going, let's have -1 right there. So there's a little bit of a wind, like an ambient wind speed here. Let's bump that up to maybe 1,000. And then you'd have to have the drag speed of at least 1, because then it is being affected. Alright. So the higher the drag, the heavier the wind, and the harder it is for your car to resist it. So if you wanted to create, for example, an out-of-bounds zone, this is how you would do it. And it's really nice because you don't have to worry about turning it off afterwards. As soon as the car leaves the zone, the effect no longer applies, which is super cool. So let's turn that back to a scale of, let's just go 20 here, just so we can kind of study it here. Yeah, it's really difficult to get inside this zone. So if you wanted to make like an out-of-bounds area without using kill grids, this is a great way to do it, because it just kicks your car right out. Additionally, if you wanted to make boost pads, if you wanted to make jump pads, etc., this is also a really great way to do that. So let's go ahead and change the force type from wind to gravity. Now, gravity works much differently. Say, for example, you wanted this direction right over here to be down. You wanted left to be down. Then you would just go ahead and disable local gravity. You set the magnitude, that's just the amount of gravity, to 25. That's the default amount. You can set it to 50 for double the gravity. And then all of a sudden, you'll notice that it's like I'm driving on a wall. In fact, let's go ahead and duplicate this, and then turn it like so. And then, bam. Oops. Oh. Now, you'll notice all of a sudden this is down, which is really weird because you can see the top of the skybox there. So you can change the direction that gravity goes, and if, for example, you want it to be in some like weird direction, all you've got to do is mess with the directional axes here. Disabling local gravity just means that that's the only type of gravity active within the zone. If you turn that off, then it gets a little bit weirder, because then all of a sudden you will see that down isn't necessarily this way. It's just kind of like a combination between the two. So it mixes in the default gravity with the custom gravity that you've set here. So that's what that does. All right. That about covers force zones, really. They're just like cool zones that you can use to exert some type of force on the car, which is nice. So once again, you can change the amount, the strength of the gravity. You can change the strength of the drag within the zone, as well as setting a gravity or a wind multiplier. A lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So now that we've covered force zones, let's move on to grav triggers. So grav triggers are kind of like force zones, except they're toggles. So you see a lot of different settings here. So grav triggers you can use to disable gravity. And that also kind of prevents your car from overheating, and it also pretty much just turns off any audio and mutes sound effects, etc. So no direction is up now. And any direction, well, I guess it's still got the gravity direction kind of controls the camera. Anyway, once your car runs into it, the effect stays. So you can change music tracks with grav triggers. So some people just use them to change music, although there's a different separate object for that called a music trigger. You can disable what did I even say? You can disable gravity, obviously, with just this little check mark here. Stop previous music, reset music, etc. This little button here just means that you can only use it once. Now, if you want this to be a persistent zone, meaning you go through it and the effect is applied and you can reset and use it again, that's what you want to uncheck. But if it's only meant to happen once, then keep that checked there. So now we're going to talk about drag. So gravity toggle here, this property has what's called a drag scale and an angular drag scale. Now you could do some really interesting things with this. I'll show you what the drag scale does here. So we turn it up to 10, test it out. All of a sudden you'll notice very similar to what happened with the force zone when we turned up the drag. The only difference is when we leave the zone, the drag stays. It stays until we reset. And then all of a sudden we can move like normal. However, you aren't limited to just moving it to 0 and just turning it up. You can do some other interesting things with it, such as setting it to a negative value. I'm going to go over what that does real quick. Setting the drag coefficient to a negative value means that your speed doesn't decrease ever. In fact, it only increases. So normally, the drag coefficient is basically the rate by which the car slows down. If the drag coefficient is negative, what that means is the car never slows down. The car only starts getting faster. It accelerates, in fact, by the rate you set the drag coefficient. The only use I've found for it is using it to imitate how difficult it is to slow down or stop on ice, but it does have some unintended side effects. Also with grav triggers, you can set the radius as well as the actual size. Either one works for setting the effectual kind of zone here. I think at this point it's pretty clear that once the car is inside, the grav trigger, then the effect gets applied. So I don't have far to go before I get the effect. So let's go over angular drag. It works the same as regular drag. However, you will notice that I go through this drag trigger, nothing seems to have happened. Well, interesting. It doesn't get really apparent until you go off. Angular drag is the rate at which you slow down for angular momentum. So spinning, turning around. It's basically how far you are from the regular rate of drag. Of the normal, rate of slowdown. So, for example, if you wanted to make it really difficult to turn, you could set the angular drag to 5, and then you can notice, it's like molasses. You just can't really turn. If you wanted to make it really difficult to, for example, air control your car, you could set that to -1, and I guarantee you, even somebody like on the most, I can't recover from that. Even somebody on the most kind of like fine-tuned, precision sort of control. It's like somebody had like a throttle, like an airplane throttle or a joystick, where they could just really kind of have fine-tuned control over the rotation. I doubt they'd be able to recover from a negative angular drag scale. On the ice realm, I set it to like 0.2, and nobody could handle it unless they had a controller. So be very careful with that. You'll get complaints. But yeah, that pretty much goes over both gravity triggers and force zones. They're really useful for adding custom physics effects to your maps. One thing I will say before I end this video about grav triggers, is that they need to be turned off. So it's going to sit for the rest of the map if you don't turn it off. That's what a lot of newer map creators get in trouble for. With like unintended behavior, is that a grav trigger, unless you die or unless you run into another grav trigger, the effect is just preserved. So say I set the angular drag to 0 because I wanted to speed you up, increase the the speed ceiling, all that jazz. But then I had it turned off. Well, say for example I just took a right turn and I avoided the grav trigger. Well, then suddenly I get to keep the effect indefinitely. You know what I mean? I have to run through here, see I speed up, and then run through the other grav trigger, and then it slows down. The effect is reversed because you can see on this grav trigger I've set the drag scale back to 1. And do be careful about hitting it as a one-time trigger, because that means that it can only apply to the vehicle once, that you can't go through it again without restarting the map. Alright, that about covers everything. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative. If you have any questions, as always, just leave it in the comment section below, and I will try my best to answer. And I look forward to seeing the stuff that you make. Bye-bye.